Welcome back to Talk Tensors. I'm excited for today's deep dive. We're taking a look at a paper about generating novel research ideas, and I think it's particularly relevant to all of us working in this crazy, fast-paced AI world. You know, like the constant deluge of new papers and new models. It can feel impossible to even keep up with the latest trends, let alone figure out like the next big thing.
Right. It's a real challenge. The sheer volume and complexity of all the research coming out in AI right now, I mean, it takes so much time and effort just to like understand the current state of the art. And then on top of that, to actually come up with new research directions, it can feel insurmountable. This paper really gets at the heart of that problem.
Yeah, I agree. The authors are tackling a very real issue for researchers. So they propose this framework. It's called the Graph of AI Ideas, GoAI for short, which uses knowledge graphs and LLMs to organize and analyze existing knowledge. And the goal is to basically help researchers like us generate new fresh research ideas. And the really cool thing is they tested this framework and the results show that it's actually pretty good at generating ideas that are not just novel, but also clear and potentially impactful.
That's the big thing, right? Not just new ideas, but good ones. And that's so interesting is that this approach moves beyond the traditional ways of analyzing research, like just feeding a bunch of papers to an LLM or looking at simple citation chains. It actually tries to capture the deeper, more intricate relationships between papers, how they build on, contradict, or extend each other.
So it's not just, oh, this paper cited that paper. It's like, okay, why was that citation made? What's the story?
Exactly, the why. So to do this, they use a 4-stage framework: literature search and filtering, GoAI graph construction, the actual idea generation, and then novelty evaluation.
Makes sense. Got to find the relevant stuff first. So walk us through how they do that initial search and filtering.
Sure. They use the Semantic Scholar API, which is pretty standard for finding relevant papers on a given topic. They grab the top-ranked papers from the search, and those become their key references, essentially the starting points for building the graph.
Okay, so we have our key references, sort of the foundation of the knowledge graph. Then what?
Right. Then it gets interesting. They expand the graph outward in 2 directions, both backward and forward. So backward means looking at all the papers cited by those key references, their intellectual ancestors, so to speak. And then forward means identifying papers that have cited the key references, showing how those ideas have evolved and impacted later research.
So it's like building an intellectual family tree, mapping the lineage of a research area. And when they're going backward, are they including everything those key references cited?
Not necessarily. They're pretty selective about it. They actually rank the backward extended papers, the ones in the reference lists, based on how semantically similar they are to the initial research topic and to the abstract of the key reference.
Oh, that makes sense. So only the papers that are most closely related to the core research problem get included.
Exactly. Only the most relevant make the cut.
I see. So it's a focused expansion. Makes me think of the whole 6 degrees of separation thing, but instead of people, it's research papers all linked together.
Kind of, yeah, but with a clear purpose. They even have a metric. They say the potential complexity can reach O2KN under ideal conditions. Shows how quickly the information grows even when you are filtering.
So you start with a small set of influential papers and then branch out from there. And I guess that's where the GoAI graph really starts to take shape, right? But it's more than just like connecting papers with citations, isn't it?
Right. It's about understanding why those connections exist. They represent these relationships as quadruples. So it's the citing paper, the citation position, the citation semantics, and then the cited paper. The position, where in the text the citation appears gives us a hint about its importance. But the really crucial element is the citation semantics, the nature of the relationship between those 2 papers.
So it's like understanding the context and intent behind the citation, not just the fact that a citation was made. This seems like the core of their innovation, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's pretty clever. It gets at the nuances that a traditional citation analysis misses. So tell me, what do you think are the different ways one paper can relate to another through citation?
Well, there's obviously building upon previous work, like taking a method from one paper and applying it to a new problem, or, maybe supporting someone else's findings with additional evidence. And then there's also contrasting or refuting existing work, right? Like pointing out flaws or proposing alternative approaches.
You got it. They've actually defined 5 specific semantic categories for these citation relationships. You have based on an extension, that's the building upon previous work you mentioned, and support and supplement, which is about corroborating findings. Contrast and alternative covers the challenging existing approaches, and question and refutation is like directly pointing out flaws or contradicting previous research. And then there's simple mention or irrelevant for those citations that don't really fit into these more meaningful categories.
That makes so much sense. So instead of just saying paper A cited paper B, we now have this richer understanding of why that citation exists. It's like adding a layer of meaning to the connections in the graph.
Right. And it's all done automatically. It's not some team of researchers manually going through and tagging everything, which would be a nightmare. They use this IPDF parser, which automatically analyzes the structure of papers. And then they feed the relevant sections, especially the context around the citations, to an LLM. The LLM is then prompted to classify the relationship between the citing and cited paper, which of those 5 categories it falls into.
So it's a really smart way of extracting these subtle but crucial relationships from all that research text. We've got our semantically rich GoAI graph. Now what?
Time for the exciting part, generating new ideas. This happens in 2 steps. Graph exploration, where the system identifies promising pathways in the graph, and then idea generation, where it synthesizes new concepts based on those paths.
So like a researcher charting a course through the existing literature, looking for those promising directions, and they use an LLM for this too, right? The GoAI agent.
Yep. And it doesn't just randomly wander around the graph. They use a beam search, which is a technique in AI for exploring a tree of possibilities in a structured way. They drew inspiration from a previous paper called TUG and adopted a 2-step exploration strategy. First, there's relation exploration, where the agent uses beam search to identify the most relevant types of relationships, those semantic categories we talked about, connected to the current set of papers.
Okay, so it's figuring out how the current research is connected to other work. But then how does it decide which papers to actually go to?
That's the second step, entity exploration. The agent uses those selected relationships to find the next set of papers, the neighboring entities in the graph that are linked in those specific ways.
Ah, got it. So it's not just about finding more papers, it's about understanding the nature of the connection between them. And then once those paths are explored, the magic happens, new ideas.
Exactly. The GoAI agent has done its exploration, found these pathways of link research. Now the LLM comes in to analyze the sequence of papers and the semantic relationships that define those paths. It looks for patterns, tries to identify potential development trends within that specific research trajectory.
So it's like spotting the emerging themes and directions based on how the research has evolved. Pretty impressive.
And it goes further. Based on those observed trends, the model then predicts future directions. And here's the key. It elaborates on those predictions to actually formulate concrete research ideas, complete with motivations, potential novelty, and suggested methodologies.
Wow. So it's not just like, oh, this is a hot topic. It's more like, here's a specific research question you could investigate, and here's why it's important and how you might go about it.
You got it. And they even have a novelty checking agent at this stage to provide an initial assessment and help refine those ideas. But of course, the big question is, how do you know if those ideas are any good, especially in terms of novelty? It's tough to automate something as creative as that.
Exactly. Generating ideas is one thing, but evaluating them, especially for novelty, that seems like a real challenge.
It is. And that's where their GoAI CoT reviewer comes in. It's a specialized evaluation model designed to assess novelty in a structured step-by-step process.
So walk me through that process. How does this reviewer actually work?
It has 3 main stages: summary, analysis, and scoring. First, it summarizes the generated research idea and the abstract of any relevant existing work. Then it analyzes the potential strengths and weaknesses of the new idea in the context of that existing literature. Finally, based on this analysis, it assigns a novelty score.
Okay, so it breaks down the evaluation into these manageable chunks. But is an LLM really capable of critical thinking about novelty? It's not just a simple comparison, right?
You're right, it's not. They address this by training the reviewer using a technique inspired by chain of thought prompting, but with a more explicit structure, hence the CoT in its name. They use special tags like summary, analysis, and score to clearly define each stage of the process. This forces the LLM to think more systematically and justify its assessment.
Oh, that's smart. Like guiding the LLM's thought process to make sure it's not just doing surface level comparisons. So it's not just relying on some random LLM, right? How did they train this reviewer to actually recognize novel ideas?
Right. They trained it on a huge data set of AI conference papers and human reviews from platforms like OpenReview, including papers from ICLR and NeuraPS. Then they fine-tuned a Llama 3.18b instruct model using a technique called LoRa, which is really efficient for adapting large models.
Wow, so it's trained on the real deal, actual human evaluations of novelty in AI research.
Yeah.
So what were the results? Did GoAI live up to the hype?
The results were really encouraging. They used the GLM4 Flash API for the main GoAI framework and the fine-tuned Llama model for the reviewer. And, importantly, they found a strong positive correlation between the novelty scores assigned by the GoAI COTE reviewer and the scores given by human experts.
That's really promising. Means the reviewer's assessments are pretty well aligned with human judgment. But how did GoAI compare to other methods for generating research ideas? That's the real test, right?
Absolutely. They compared GoAI to some of the leading methods out there, like Chain of Ideas, AI Scientist, and Research Agent. And the findings were pretty impressive. GoAI consistently generated ideas that were rated as more novel and significant by human evaluators. All the details are in Figure 4 in Table 1 of their paper.
Sounds like GoAI is a clear winner. Did they do anything else to show the effectiveness of their approach?
They did. They ran an ablation study, which basically means they removed different parts of the system to see how it affected the results. They found that the structured thinking approach they used in the evaluation model was really crucial. Removing that structure significantly decreased the correlation with human assessments, as shown in Table 2.
So forcing the LLM to think step by step really makes a difference in accurately evaluating novelty. I remember they also included a case study in their paper, focusing on the issue of hallucinations in LLMs. What did that show?
Right. They used that as an example to showcase GoAI's capabilities. They found that GoAI was much better at finding relevant background papers and generating research ideas that were aligned with the current trends in addressing LLM hallucinations compared to, say, Chain of Ideas. In fact, Chain of Ideas even included a paper that was totally unrelated to the topic, which led to a less focused research idea.
So GoAI is not just generating ideas, it's generating good, relevant ones. It's like it has a better understanding of the research landscape and can identify those meaningful connections that lead to better research directions.
Exactly. And this brings us to our novel notions segment, where we take the core ideas of the paper and push them even further. Based on what we've discussed, what are some potential research avenues that this work could unlock?
Well, one thing that strikes me is GoAI's ability to map research trends by analyzing those semantic relationships between papers. What if we could use that to identify potential interdisciplinary breakthroughs?
Oh, that's a really cool idea. I like where you're going with this.
Think about it. You could use GoAI to connect different fields, like finding instances where a technique is highly cited as a contrast and alternative in one field, but as a based on an extension in another. That could point to a novel synthesis opportunity, a place where two different fields are unknowingly converging on the same underlying principles.
I see what you mean. It's like identifying those moments when incremental progress in two separate areas suddenly reaches a critical mass, creating the potential for a whole new interdisciplinary field to emerge.
Exactly. And maybe you could even use the GoAI Coach Reviewer to assess the potential impact of combining these seemingly disparate ideas. It's like using the map of existing knowledge to not just explore existing paths, but to forge entirely new ones across disciplinary boundaries. What other novel directions come to mind?
Okay, how about this? What if we flip the script and used GoAI for what we could call negative idea generation? Instead of focusing on how research builds upon existing knowledge, we could look specifically at papers with a lot of question and refutation citations.
Interesting. So instead of looking for what's working, we're looking for what's not working.
Right. It's like systematically pinpointing assumptions or methods that are being consistently challenged. That could lead to really important research that focuses on overturning existing paradigms, finding the flaws in what we think we know.
And again, you could use the GoAI Coty Reviewer to specifically score the potential impact of successfully refuting a highly influential work. It's like using GoAI to not just build upon the existing knowledge, but to strategically dismantle and rebuild it based on identified weaknesses.
That's a powerful notion. I like it. It seems like this GoAI framework really opens up a lot of possibilities for how we think about research and scientific discovery.
Absolutely. It's a significant step forward in using AI to not just analyze existing research, but to actively contribute to the creative process. It moves beyond simple citation analysis and actually understands the semantic relationships between papers, which is so crucial for understanding the evolution of knowledge.
Couldn't agree more. And it makes you wonder, as AI research continues to accelerate at this crazy pace, will tools like GoAI become absolutely essential for human researchers to even stay in the game? Or will we eventually reach a point where the AI is driving the scientific discovery process, with humans taking a back seat? It's an exciting and maybe a little daunting future to contemplate.
A very thought-provoking question to end on. And for our listeners who want to dive deeper into the specifics of the GoAI framework, you can find a link to the paper in the show notes. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive into the fascinating world of AI research.